I mean, that is to do with government legislation in the UK,
Okay.
but a lot of it is probably their own business model as well. Whereas Pinnacle, it's completely the opposite. Right. They are happy to educate because educating punters means more turnover.
Right. I think I could have a guess at what book that you might be referencing there. Is it mostly green on their website?
I'm going to absolutely say nothing.
Fair enough. All right.
I neither confirm nor deny.
Gotcha.
You're listening to Behind the Lines, a podcast presented by In Play Live and powered by Pinnacle, the #1 sportsbook where winners play and never get limited. Go to pinnacle.com/InPlayLive to sign up and get in the game. You're listening to Behind the Lines, a podcast presented by In Play Live and powered by Pinnacle, the #1 sportsbook where winners play and never get limited. Go to pinnacle.com/InPlayLive to sign up and get in the game.
Welcome in. It's Behind the Lines, powered by Pinnacle, purifying the sports betting industry. I'm Shane. Pace is off this week, but we've got the great Gosu joining us in a little bit for some NBA playoffs. But first, an independent sports betting analyst with decades in the game and the author of several books, including his latest, Fixed Odds, Sports Betting, and Monte Carlo or Bust. He's an expert in probability theory and betting risk. Joseph Buchdahl, thanks for joining us on the show. How are you, man?
Thanks for having me, Shane. I just have to do one correction for you. The Fixed Odds book was the first one. It's not more of a more recent one. That was actually goes back 20 years or over 20 years now.
Wow.
But you're right. The Monte Carlo was the most recent one.
Yeah, you know what? I said that was the most recent. I meant to say Monte Carlo being the most recent, and I had them just sort of flip-flopped in my notes there. Thanks for correcting me on that. But I think Fixed Odds Sports Betting was sort of your breakthrough book initially, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was the one that I wrote. Yeah, what was it? Published in 2002 or 2003, and it was really kind of came off the back of doing a lot of stuff on betting forums and just writing a load of stuff. And I thought one day, I'm not getting paid for this. It's all going to get lost. Why? I need to put this down. And just woke up one day and thought, well, I need to write a book about this. So I wrote the book, and then found a publisher. Really, kind of the backwards way of doing it. But fortunately, I found a publisher that took it, and the rest is history. So yeah, they've taken all my other 3 books over the years. But it was the first one that got me into it. So it was really specifically about fixed odds football betting primarily. And I mean, obviously in the States, you know that as money line. It was really very little on Asian handicap, little on point spread and so on. But yeah, fixed odds or money line, as you call it.
Right. Yeah. And I really want to get into your latest one, Monte Carlo or Bust, because I found that interesting. Really dives into probability. But before we get there, a little bit about sort of your backstory, how you got here, and I'm really sort of hoping you can help our audience become smarter, more disciplined, data informed sports bettors. Many in our audience do a lot of live sports betting, In Play Live, of course, as the name kind of puts it. Do you do any live betting? How do you approach betting? What do you bet on these days? What's your focus?
I have never really got into live betting at all. I've always taken the view that you need so much more data for that, and I've always taken a historical approach. And ultimately, it's not something that I've been able to. I just haven't got the access to the data, and I've never really felt the need to do it. I think it's also more algorithmically driven, and so in my view would be harder to beat. So, over the years, I'm not as people probably know, I'm not the most sophisticated bettor. I'm not the best bettor out there. I'm good enough to beat what we call the soft books or the recreational books in the UK. I was never really good enough to beat the sharp books, and never really had the motivation to do so because I was making an income through affiliation anyway. So yeah,
right, yeah, and we'll get into a little bit more about sort of how you navigate the soft books and kind of keep going with them, because that's a whole issue on this side of the pond that you guys have been dealing with for a long time. We just talked a little bit about that off air. We'll get into that in a little bit, but first, you've been spending so many years, and in all your years studying probability in markets, what's the most surprising thing you've learned about how people approach betting?
I mention this every time I'm asked these kind of questions, and I suppose it maybe was surprising in the early days. It's not really so surprising to me now that I've learned a lot about the psychology of betting. It's the overconfidence that people have. You see, you ask 100 people, survey 100 people, and they say, "Hey, do you think you're good enough to beat the bookmakers?" And you probably find that average of maybe half, maybe more than half, will say, "No, I can do it. I can win." Of course, the reality is not the case, and even the ones that are actually, they'll look at their records and they'll tell you that they're winning. And in fact, if you actually got to see the real record, you'd find that they're not. And so it's the overconfidence. It's probably the most surprising thing to bettors, that they will learn the hard way. Over time, they'll find out actually that what they thought they were good at is not necessarily that is the case. It's a really hard nut to crack. And so for most bettors, that's probably the most surprising thing for them, that over their journey of this thing, it's much harder than they thought they might have once originally imagined to do.
Yeah, I can imagine that, given especially to that. I think most average bettors, people out there, recreational bettors, don't even track their wagers. So how would they even know?
Well, some of them do, and then some of them probably won't tell the truth so much.
Yeah.
So, or they'll probably denial is one of the. It's very easy to deny the truth, to be honest. Sometimes,
yeah,
even to oneself.
Yeah. Big time. And if you're not tracking it, or you're not doing it diligently, or maybe you say you are, then you're not really going to have a true picture of what your betting record looks like.
Yeah. I think another thing that people kind of make mistakes about is the way they stake as well. I mean, obviously the most important thing that I've always told people not to do is chase their losses, and it's probably one of the first things that an amateur will do, is that they'll lose some and they'll think, well, I need to try and recover that and up the stakes or change the staking plan or start to do things differently. And it's not a clever thing to do, really, certainly not to chase losses, because if you haven't changed, if you're not any more skilled just because you start to increase your stakes, it's just you're gambling more. That's all you're doing. So
let's talk a little bit about that, because you do focus a lot on psychological traps of betting, recency bias, and as you just referred to, chasing losses. How do you think that might manifest differently when it comes to live betting versus pre-match betting?
I think everything's just going to play out so much more quickly in live betting, because the market's just moving so much quicker. And as I said before, it's not something I do myself, so I don't have an experience of it, but I can only imagine that these biases will just play out much, much faster, and potentially they'll be more aggressive, because you're probably not paying attention to the biases that you may be experiencing, just because everything's just moving so much more quickly.
Right. And those biases, let's dig into that a little bit more, because you've written a lot about randomness, variance. What's the difference between seeing something that's a signal versus noise, and how those are influencing your biases? How can bettors train themselves to distinguish the difference?
Well, you have to think long term. I mean, like Nate Silver said with his poker, uncovering the signal. It can take thousands and thousands of plays, and it's the same with sports betting. I mean, there are quicker ways to do it. You can look at the closing line. Of course, some people don't agree with the closing line philosophy, but if you're just looking at your results and your outcomes, it can take months and even years to actually uncover this signal. And so you have to, if you have a series of wins, and that's not a signal at all. It's because that's potentially just mostly variance and mostly good luck. And of course, the flip side, if you have a series of losses, it could be not evidence that you're a bad player. It could just be bad luck. And so it's teaching a bettor to understand that it takes time for you to separate that signal and the noise. And no matter what kind of betting market you're in, it will always take the signal is always so much more weaker than the noise, and it's just understanding that reality. And I think that's probably the hardest lesson, and certainly the most important lesson beyond not chasing losses that a sports bettor should learn for sure.
So let's dive into that a little bit. How would you describe a signal? What is a signal? How do I recognize it?
Well, I mean, to go back to the closing line, the obvious signal would be if the bookmaker recognizes that you're bringing information to the market. And one way that happens is if they reduce their odds once you've placed your money. That would be a quick way of signaling. But of course, you can't know instantaneously that it's your money that's doing that. And if there are other reasons that why the closing line or market moves might not be evidence of your information. And so then all you've got to go on is your outcomes. And as I said, if you just base everything on your outcomes, that can take hundreds and thousands of plays statistically before you can be sure that you've actually done something beyond the realms of chance.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I can think of some markets, especially a sharp book that will move when you bet the line potentially, and how often, even myself, how often I've moved the line and then seeing like, oh, I moved this, that must be a good sign.
It's a quicker way to get the answer you're looking for. It's a quicker way to be sure that you have some skill and you are bringing information to the market.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, that's what it is. It's just an information market, and they're paying you for your information. And if you bring data that's useful and data that they don't already have, they'll pay you for it, and that will show up in terms of the movement of the line or the price.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of sharp book operators and people who have experience at sharp books on the show here before, and they've used that term quite a bit. Buying information and how valuable that can be. Okay.
I mean, that's the kind of the lesson that Marco Bloom tells, or when he was at Pinnacle. It's how he saw it operating, and why would I be one to disagree with that philosophy? It's coming from the horse's mouth, as it were, isn't it?
So, yeah. And we had Paris Smith on several months ago, almost a year ago now, and same idea there with what she was doing at Pinnacle as well.
Exactly.
And trying to just get as much information as possible, and then sharpening their lines based on that.
Yeah.
Is any other ways to identify a signal other than how the market's moving, whether it's moving with you or against you?
Like I said, if you just base it on outcomes, you can do it, but it just takes much longer, I guess. I mean, the closing line is the obvious one, isn't it? Or the market moves. It's one that I've used to demonstrate whether a system that I'm doing is working, and potentially that will work much faster. I mean, I think there's a little section in the book there, Monte Carlo, where you can uncover that signal in as few as 50 to 100 plays. So that's the obvious one to use. The trouble is, of course, if you're an odds originator, then the bookmaker doesn't necessarily know you'll bring any information. I mean, I would always argue that that's going to show up in the end. If they recognise you as a bettor that is bringing information, they may not know it in the early days, but I would assume that in the end they would figure that you are bringing information to the market. But if you're initially an odds originator, they may not be aware of what you're doing, and then of course, how are you going to know? Well, you've got your results, but it takes so long. So
yeah, and you have to have that long-term mindset. In Monte Carlo or Bust, you explore simulation and modeling. Are there simple models or heuristics that live bettors could use in real time to inform their decisions?
It depends what you mean by model. If you're talking about forecasting, I mean, primarily I wasn't so interested in prediction,
right?
With this book, I mean, there is a little chapter on where Monte Carlo can be used with prediction models, but most of what I was doing was showing how it could be used for demonstrating when you've found your signal against the noise, and also showing how when you're winning, and also like the maximum drawdowns and losses and that sort of stuff, and showing how you can model those things, and then in particular the various uses it has with different staking plans, and particularly the Kelly staking plan as well. So it was less about prediction and more about the other facets to your gambling or to your sports betting play.
Right.
But no, I mean, I did use it for example, something that was at the Dixon-Coles model in soccer prediction forecasting, and you can probably use that in ice hockey too. I don't know I can't remember if the Dixon-Coles is used in ice hockey because it's kind of a similar market. But it's the Monte Carlo simulation is probably less useful as a predictive method of modeling. But you would use it as part of other forecasting methods.
I've got to ask you, sorry, what were you referring to there? Dixon-Coles? What is that?
Dixon-Coles. It's a prediction model based on the Poisson distribution. So it's based on So goals in soccer they're distributed roughly according to Poisson distribution. So you get quite a lot of games with 0 and 1 goals, and then some with 2, and then a few with 3 and 4 and 5. So it's a kind of an asymmetric distribution, and you can use it. And it's assumed that goals are roughly distributed according to this probability distribution, and from that you can make predictions on actual outcomes of whether the team, how many goals will be scored for a particular match, and then from that you can base the probability of a home win or a draw or an away win. I mean, in the early days, that's probably what the bookmakers were doing in terms of predicting their home, draw, and away odds and correct scores and that sort of thing. And I guess it's probably also used in ice hockey to a degree as well. I mean, it's a pretty old model now. It was one of the early ones developed in the 1990s, I think. It was studied by a couple of mathematicians in the UK called Dixon. Well, their surnames were Dixon and Coles, and so that's why the model's called Dixon-Coles model. And in the book, I used it using expected goals to like make predictions of. It was not so much making predictions of specific matches, but I used it to then run a simulation of how the remainder of the COVID season in 2020 would play out in the English Premier League. So if I used the expected goals within a Dixon-Coles model to predict the outcomes for each of those games, and then you run the simulation. Like you get the probabilities from that model, but then you'd use the Monte Carlo simulation, run it 100,000 times, and then see what the average outcomes were, and then predict who was going to be the Premier League winner and that sort of thing, and who was going to get top 4 and who was going to get relegated. So that's kind of where you would use it for that kind of simulation.
Right. Does that sort of simulation not just look at who's scoring, like which team is scoring how many goals and how frequently, but does it look at the timing of the goals?
Not specifically, but you could develop a more sophisticated model if you had the data. Yeah, for sure, you could. But you'd need more data on historical data on times of goals, that sort of thing. But I wasn't looking. I mean, I don't have that data.
Right.
So, but for sure, I'm no doubt that's what the bookmakers will do, because they will have access to all the best Opta stats and so on. So there's no doubt they will be doing that sort of thing.
I'm no expert in betting soccer, football. But hockey, is a big part of what we do at In Play Live. There's a lot of late goals in hockey, and we tend to focus on specifically those goals that might come late, or even lack thereof sometimes. In soccer, though, just anecdotally, sort of having watching soccer myself and just sort of appreciating the game, I feel like we tend to see a lot of late goals in soccer too.
It's standard. There's more goals in the second half. There's more goals in the last 15 minutes. There's more goals in extra time as well. So, not extra time, injury time, and that's just how the game plays out. I think there's probably a number of factors why there is. It's probably motivation to win by the team that needs to win, or players getting tired, those sorts of things. So there are various reasons as to why, and I think it's pretty standard in those sorts of low scoring games that you tend to see bigger numbers in the second half, second periods, right, and later on in the game.
Yeah, more action, more intensity, more desperation, motivation shift, all of that.
Yeah, and then obviously player tiredness.
Right, sort of right, and especially when it comes to the defensive side of things. Right, yeah. That all makes sense. I want to sort of throw a quote at you. I think this comes from it comes from Monte Carlo or Bust, but I could be mistaken there. But I think you said the real test of a bettor is not whether they can win in the short term, but whether they can avoid destruction over the long term. And I think this focuses on bankroll management, but also emotional management. Can you sort of elaborate on how the two kind of go together?
Yeah. I guess in short, it's really important that the sports bettor learns how to lose. And so that means taking the emotional aspect out of it and almost disregarding the results. If you truly have a signal, truly have skill, the short-term results shouldn't matter. And when you lose bets, you should just forget about it and move on to the next one. I mean, I'm just trying to think of an example recently. Was it? Well, probably Rory McIlroy last night.
Yeah.
He did. Was a spectacular example of it where he completely screwed up in the last hole, but delivered in the tiebreak, the playoff.
What drama! That
and
was
then
incredible.
Roger Federer, he gave a really, really good lesson of this as well recently. I think he was, I think when he was accepting his honorary degree somewhere in one of the Swiss universities, I think it might have been, and he asked the audience, he said, "How many points do you think I lost in my career?" And of course, anyone that understands tennis will know the answer, but then obviously they were all guessing. And then he said it was about 48%. I only won 52% of my points. So nearly every other point I lost. Now he's making the case that if he dwelt on that emotionally, it'd be really, really hard to be a good player and to then to win the following points. But that's part of tennis play. And in a way, it's part of all sports betting. It's certainly part of sports betting. If you emotionally dwell on your losses, and of course, one of the strongest biases is loss aversion. So when we lose it, as Daniel Kahneman told us, it hurts twice as much as winning is enjoyed. If you're bad at emotionally regulating the pain of that, you're never really going to succeed in these fields, whether it's sports or sports betting. And that was kind of a really good lesson that he gave. You put it out of your mind, and you move on to the next one. Obviously, if you're not a skilled bettor, it's what I'm not saying is you put something out of your mind and then you move on because you think you're going to win the next one, and then maybe you up your stake and then you lose that one, and then maybe you up your stake again. That's not the lesson I'm giving. I'm saying emotionally to regulate your sports betting, you need to forget about the outcomes. It's not about the outcomes. It's completely about the process.
Yeah, what you just referred to there about upping the stakes and chasing the losses, I think is you're describing the martingale, the good old fashioned martingale that a lot of
or any one of those systems. It could be, or the D'Alembert system, and any progressive staking is basically gambling suicide. Really, in the end, you don't do it.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more then about bankroll management, because that's the other side of that equation, right? It's like you said, you got to balance your emotions and sort of learn to lose. But how would you go about learning to effectively manage the bankroll with the emotions? And that can also mean learning to win.
First of all, you've got to know how good you are. And then once you know that, you can then decide what kind of staking and money management you want to use. And also it depends on the market you're in. You might just decide, look, let's just go for simple fixed size stakes, level stakes for everything I do. Or you might decide to go for a fixed profit system where you aim to win the same amount for every bet. Or you might be more sophisticated and do a more proportional staking. So it's when you get into the realms of Kelly, so percentage staking. So you as you win more, you increase you're betting the same percentage of your existing bankroll, and as your bankroll starts to increase, you start to increase that. And then, of course, Kelly staking takes not only that into account, but it takes into account the edge that you have, or you believe that you have of every bet, as well as the odds that you've got. There are dangers and pitfalls with Kelly staking because it can be quite aggressive, and what most people who use it will argue is that you employ some kind of fractional staking or fractional Kelly staking. So rather than bet a full Kelly stake, you'd bet like a half Kelly or a quarter Kelly to reduce the risk. Obviously, you reduce your potential profits, but it's about a risk management strategy. So I think one of the things I wanted to cover in the book, in the staking chapter, was how you would use these simulations to kind of get a handle on what your probabilities were in terms of the chances of going bust or losing over a particular period of time or winning over a particular period of time. And that's what I was trying to encourage people to do through this Monte Carlo simulation method, is that if you put in your inputs about what edges you think you have and how much money you've got at your disposal, what you can expect to happen in terms of losing sequences, maximum drawdowns, what your kind of your median bankroll expectation would be if you were doing things like proportional Kelly staking and those sorts of concepts. And it's really to encourage people to not only get a handle of what their edge is, but also what that edge could deliver. And so you know the risks and probabilities that you're potentially facing, rather than just to go into it blindly and think, well, I've got this edge and I'm just going to chuck money at it. It's to kind of the book was about encouraging people to know their risks.
On that topic of knowing your risks, and since we're on the Kelly criterion, one of the things that you sort of said off the top of the show is that, bettors tend to be overconfident. Do you find that plays out as well when you start looking at your edge and what you think your expected edge is?
Oh, for sure. It's actually, I think I did write this in the book. I might have written an article as well, one of my last articles for Pinnacle, possibly, I can't remember. The difference between winning and losing in terms of like expected bank growth and so on, it's really marginal. It's really tiny. And that's quite surprising. There's a few graphs in the book there that really demonstrated that the difference, say, between someone who's just losing to the margin. So let's say on the point spread, it's probably whatever it is. It's minus 110, or minus 105. Losing to the margin versus maybe an expected value of 2, 3, 4%. It's actually really, really small in terms of, for example, the expected number of consecutive losses, or your expected number of wins, or whatever it might be, whatever stat you're looking to model. The difference between a winner and a loser, or I should say, I don't mean winner as in lucky winner and unlucky loser. I mean expected winner and expected loser. It's really different. The difference is tiny, and it's quite surprising how different. And I think that's really a lesson worth learning, because it's quite humbling, because it shows you how a lucky loser could easily outperform a slightly unlucky winner.
When we're talking about that difference, I imagine we're talking about, the difference of a 3% edge, from say a 49%, better to a 52, 53%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly it. And over the long term, it's the difference between total disaster and potentially a successful income from it. But in terms of expected number of consecutive losses, or the size of expected drawdowns, maximum drawdowns, that sort of thing, and the percentage time that your bankroll will be up after a certain number of plays, there's very little difference between a winner and a loser, and it's worth knowing that.
So, something else I think you mentioned is how dangerous it can be to believe that why something happened in a match, a game, whatever it might be, that why, and having this sort of false sense of certainty that things played out the way you knew they would play out. And I've been victim of this myself. I thought this would happen, then it happened, and now I got it right, and I'm on top of the world, and I know what the next thing is gonna, what will happen next in either that game or the next game coming on after it, or whatever it might be. What advice would you give to bettors out there to sort of keep them grounded?
Well, first of all, know what it is, which is it's the illusion of causality, isn't it?
Right.
It's something happens, and you believe that you made it happen. I mean, I don't want to get political here, but probably the master at this, whether he knows it to be untrue or not, is the US president. He's just
here we go
on today. Yeah, I don't want to get political, but he's been talking about how the markets, gone up record numbers. Yes, last week, and the narrative is he made it happen. And of course, he's obviously not talking about the what happened before that, the terrible crashes before that, and so on. But the idea, it's very binary thinking, isn't it? That Tolstoy, didn't he, wrote? There was an allegory of I can't remember what it was. Was it the fox and the hedgehog? Possibly, I'm not sure. And it's the hedgehog just knows very simple things and thinks in binary terms. It's like X happened and Y caused it, and usually the Y is the individual. I did something to make it happen. Whereas the fox thinks many different things at once, and sees the world in much more complicated terms, and it's more of a complex system. And so there are many factors that may be at play in determining what causes a particular outcome, and a lot of it is noise and randomness and variance, and it's another lesson that's worth knowing, because all of gambling whatever it might be, poker, well, certainly casino, it's entirely variance, but the skill-based market, so poker and sports, it's still nearly all variance, and the skill and the signal will only reveal itself over the long term. And it's well worth trying to think more like more like a fox, see it as the world and as a complex system, and that you may bring some information to the market, and it may have some small relevance, but it will only show itself over time. Nearly everything that happens will still be chance. I mean, think of a soccer game, 22 players doing all sorts of things over 90 minutes. I mean, the different potential histories that could play out over a 90-minute game with all of that interaction, the player interaction, the number of ball passes and so on. Think one of those that could have gone different, you then have an entirely different history that plays out. And so the idea that what you saw was entirely a result of what you may have thought at the beginning or what someone else may have thought at the beginning is just complete nonsense. So I kind of try and think of it more as almost like a quantum mechanical system where there's just like nearly a potentially infinite number of world histories that could play out, and whatever influence you can bring to that will be tiny, and it will only show itself over many, many hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of plays.
It's very clear that you have a long-term approach, long-term outlook to sports betting. I mean, I would say that it's very common amongst people who have been doing it a while and are successful sports bettors, but a lot of people out there, average recreational bettors, or people who are just sort of trying to enter this space and learn and grow in it and become successful, it can be very sort of, I think, maybe challenging to grasp that long-term outlook. How did you go about getting your head around it?
Well, it took a long time. It took a very long time. I mean, it started with me basically just downloading a load of data in the mid-90s and playing with it and developing systems and spending several years trying to win and realizing that I wasn't winning as much as I thought I was going to win. Probably, if truth be told, just breaking even, which is where the idea for selling the data came from back in the early 2001. That was with the football data site. That's when it started. And then it took another kind of several years to figure out how to properly beat the recreational books, just through the kind of the wisdom of the crowd and the line steaming philosophies, those sorts of things. And it took years and years to work it all out. Some people would say that's because I'm not very bright and it should all be pretty obvious. Well, maybe they're cleverer than I am, and that's fine. And of course, I never really got to grips with the sharp books either. I never made an attempt, I suppose, to beat the likes of Pinnacle and Betfair Exchange, partly because I didn't need to. I was making an income from the advertising, so it wasn't so important to me. Whether I could have done it, could I? Maybe, possibly, but I've been tempered over the years by seeing so much overconfidence bias, and I wouldn't like to assume that just because I've done it for 20 years that I would be good enough to beat the sharp books. That's possible. It's possible I could have done it, but I never gave it my full attempt and given my full all to do it. So it's taken a long time. I mean, I've been in this now nearly 30 years. And all I could say in terms of my own betting is that I'm good enough to beat the recreationals, and that's it. And that's how hard it is. I'd say I've written a couple of articles for Pinnacle about what I think is the percentage of people that can beat the sharp books. And my view is it's not more than 1%. Certainly on the Betfair Exchange, they say that about 0.5% of their customers will pay their premium charge. So 1 in 200, that's potentially 1 in 200 are good enough to make a living from it. It's more with the recreationals. It's probably something like 3 to 5% know how to beat them. But most people, they're never going to do it, either because they don't do the work or they give up because they've just lost too much money and they just decide to quit, which is probably better than throwing it all away, believing that you'll one day get there.
Probably a good idea to call it at some point if you're way down deep in a hole. So I want to ask, because you're targeting the soft books specifically, and you've made that very clear here. But we know what happens over time. And I think on this side of the pond over in North America, it's not as widely known but at least within our community at In Play Live, is something we talk about quite a bit, which is limits and, getting banned or restricted or, limited to the point where you can only place a couple of cents on a site. And many in our community have gone through that process. Some are sort of just beginning to learn and understand. And it's interesting to me because we'll run into bettors who are joining the community. They've never experienced that before, and then they experience it for the first time, and they get hit with the limits. And they find it to be totally unfair and unjust, and they're completely surprised. This sports book would let me lose thousands upon thousands, and then as soon as I win some of it back and show any kind of winning tendencies, boom, you're out, you're cut. You get shown the door. How did you sort of grapple with it over the years and sort of come to terms with it?
Probably in the same way that some of your followers did, which was a lot of anger and throwing things at the computers.
Right.
And sending off emails and having a whinge at the bookmakers and getting nowhere. And over time, I've just resigned myself to this. Is just they limit you, then they restrict you, then they ban you. And I suppose I have to be selfish here and say it didn't matter so much to me because I had a different form of income. My primary income, my professional income, is the advertising. The sports betting was never. That wasn't a professional income, and I certainly didn't ever pay any tax on that bit because it wasn't what I was doing professionally. So over time, as you get restricted more and more and more, I gave up. So what I do now is just all recreational. It's just all I bet for fun and just do stupid bets on at the likes of Betfair Exchange, where I know I can bet happily and not be restricted even if I'm winning. To most of them, I was. I mean, one or two of them, I got restricted and I was even losing. Famously, I think Ladbrokes was they famously I was down. I actually was down quite a big negative, and they took away my access to the promotions, which I thought, well, that's fine because I don't want your promotions. Never wanted them in the first place. That's absolutely fine. And then a few months later, I don't think I'd even placed another bet with them, and they just closed the account. And it's like, well, all right, I didn't. They obviously decided that whether they knew my name, I don't know. I think there was one. I actually lasted 17 bets. There was another one. I lasted one bet, and that could be just because they knew the name. I don't know. But there are things you can do. I mean, to stay under the radar. And I know people that will do that. And obviously, the obvious one is bet small, bet on silly markets that they think that you couldn't possibly be skilled in, like goal scorer markets, that sort of thing. Throw them in with doubles, trebles, accumulators,
right.
parlays, as you call them. Yeah. Maybe have the odd casino bet. That's something I wouldn't advocate doing a lot, but just kind of things to disguise what you're doing, and that will potentially elongate the longevity of your betting account. And I suppose in the early days, I wasn't really wise to what was going on, and I just took this approach that, well, of course they should be allowed me to bet, and when they didn't, it's like, well, this is completely unfair. But over time, the more and more of them get closed, and I just professionally, as it were, started to lose the will to bother. And so it's just, for me, what I do now is just all recreational.
Yeah, it's funny because I think, a bettor can sort of go through an evolution where, they bet for fun and they bet recreationally and they mostly lose long term. And then they say, I want to bet better at this. How do I get better? Oh, well, don't make these silly bets that are, long shot parlays and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And it's
but
like, bet straights only and find an edge and bet straights only. And you do that and you find your edge, and then you start to realize, wait, I'm getting limited at these books. How do I maintain a longer leash at these books? I have to go make stupid bets and bet parlays.
Exactly it. Yeah. I know it seems counterintuitive, but that's kind of, and also probably most important as well, don't bet on a bookmaker that's best in market. I mean, and again, then by doing that, you're giving up some of your edge because you're taking an inferior price. But it's more likely to keep you disguised for longer doing those sorts of things. And just most importantly, just betting small and betting often, I suppose, and maximizing the number of books that you use, but just having a lot of small bets, which may not in the end deliver you an income that you think is worthy of giving up your daytime job for, but it might give you kind of holiday money, I suppose.
Which is something, which is more than what most bettors are getting out of this industry.
Yeah, it's more than most. Yeah. But I think ultimately, if you want a career in sports betting that's going to pay your mortgage and your lifestyle, you have to accept that it's going to have to be at the sharp books or the exchanges, and that means being 10 times better than the average sharp recreational bettor, because you're not going to be able to just beat them by beating their odds. Because I mean, the thing, going back to the information, the thing about the recreational books is that why would they pay you for information that they already hold? They know that their odds are not necessarily the sharpest, and they're deliberately so for the way that they structure their markets. And so when someone comes along that knows how to beat them, that's why they ban them or limit them, because they're not going to pay you for information they already know. They know their odds are beatable by someone that has the same information. You don't get paid for holding the same information that they do, and that's why they restrict you.
I want to pivot the conversation. You referenced this a few times. You wrote this at Pinnacle. You wrote that at Pinnacle. You write quite a bit of educational material for Pinnacle. The founder, the founder of the company that puts this podcast on In Play Live, Andrew Pace, who's usually my co-host here on the show, he's actually just started creating content for Pinnacle as well. I came across several of your articles on Pinnacle. You've also put out these books over the course of your career. How would you sort of describe betting content and how that's changed over the years?
Well, certainly Pinnacle, their mission was always to educate the bettor. I mean, it was part of their business structure, business plan. Really, it's the more turnover they can get, the more sophisticated punter they can get into their system, the better it is for their business model. And so they're obviously the complete opposite, really, to a recreational book. And the idea is get more people trying to play to win is better for them. More turnover, more profit. And so it entirely makes sense for them, or the likes of Pinnacle, to have like a betting university or a series of betting articles that is trying to be educational. It completely makes sense. Whereas, of course, a recreational, it's totally the opposite. I won't name the name, but there's a brand that required me to remove their advertising from any page that had any words like win or skill. They were absolutely adamant. We do not want to appear on those pages. I mean, partly that is to do with government legislation in the UK, but a lot of it is probably their own business model as well. Whereas Pinnacle, it's completely the opposite. Right. They are happy to educate because educating punters means more turnover.
Right. I think I could have a guess at what book you might be referencing there. Is it mostly green on their website?
I'm going to absolutely say nothing.
Fair enough. All right.
I neither confirm nor deny.
Gotcha. Yeah. What about like how, that content, so that educational content, and you found your place, in sort of the content and sports betting content ecosystem by creating this type of educational content. But would you say that, that's sort of become the norm in the space, or is it kind of the opposite now?
What, you mean the norm as in to become more educational?
Yeah, just in terms of the betting content. Like if I'm an average sports bettor out there and I go searching for betting content, it seems to me like I have to wade through a lot of crap before I get to something that might actually teach me something.
That was one of the reasons why I wrote the books, and hopefully most people think they're not a lot of crap, because I read a lot of crap right. in the days. And again, I won't name names, but there was an awful lot of crap that I just thought, this is absolute junk. And if honest, there was some one or two that they had full of systems, and I tested the systems and they were junk. And I just thought, well, what is the point of these? Well, maybe they did once work and then they got exploited away. But I think most of what I read was just anecdotal rubbish. And so that was one of the reasons why I actually wanted to try with the books I've done over the years to just bring a little bit more rigor to the whole thing. As with regard to your question, I suppose, it's just become more and more and more educational, and the direction, especially with AI as well, it's just there's going to be more and more of this kind of educate the punter, and there'll be more tools available to the sports bettor. I think that AI is the obvious thing. You could probably now, instead of going read a book, you can just ask an AI to break stuff down that you want to ask and what you want answers to, and then obviously ultimately, AI will potentially be completely revolutionise the forecasting industry as well, to the point where will there even be any edges left to exploit?
Right.
That's what I wonder.
We'll get to a point where everybody is sharp all the time.
Well, it's not just everybody, all the customers, but also the bookmakers as well. If everything is AI driven and everyone's doing the same thing, then it just becomes it's like in the Amazon, the trees are racing to the light, and it's you end up what you're left with is a game of chance because everyone's doing the same thing.
Right. Yeah. On that sort of topic of technology tools, what advice would you give to somebody who's just sort of entering this space now and they're looking to win long term? What would you tell them about leveraging tools and technology to find an edge?
Well, I'd probably say, start with AI. That'd be a really good place to start with whatever books are out there. Certainly understand about value betting, learn about money management and Kelly criteria. Do all of those basics, I guess. And then, most importantly, expect to work really hard, harder than you would at your day job, and it's not going to be easy. Too many people think it's a way out of my regular life. I mean, I probably thought that as well initially.
Yeah, I've been there.
It's a way out of a regular life. It's easy because all I've got to do is do better than the bookmaker. Well, good luck.
Great advice. Love it. Joseph Buchdahl, where can people find you? How can they connect with you? Are you open to messages?
Yeah, I'm always open. Twitter is the obvious one, or it's called X these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
Keep forgetting that. Just on the handle 12expert, so 12xpert is the handle, or just through the website football-data.co.uk. You can just email me. Is a good way. Just I'm always willing to take a question, unless if it's a stupid question, you might get a stupid answer. But otherwise, I've always taken the education approach. I've always been willing to give someone the time of day if they're interested.
Well, Joseph, appreciate you coming on the show. Appreciate the work that you're doing to educate people and educate the masses and help create better bettors out there. Joseph, thanks so much for joining us. All right. Well, a whole conversation there about probability, data, statistics. It only makes sense that we now turn our attention to John Wilson, Gosu, joining us now for a grind on the NBA. Yes, it is playoff time, baby. Ready to go. John, you've been looking at NBA for a while now. You've been making a lot of successful calls in the group. Within In Play Live, on the live stream and in the Discord. And now you're ready to take a look at the playoffs and kind of break things down for us. So I guess right off the top here, as I sort of pull up what the picture of the playoffs looks like, why don't you give me a sense of what you sort of have found surprising and kind of what you're looking at least this first round, the play-in games and the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah. So interesting way that everything shook out. With that Warriors Clippers game that went to overtime is kind of like the first real playoff feeling game as we kind of head into the playoffs. So Warriors fell into the play-in tournament there because of that loss, and the Clippers will play the Nuggets in the first round. I will say that the number, I thought as soon as the Warriors fell to the play-in and they were in that 7 spot, with the home court, I think they're like 6.5 point favorites over the Grizzlies in that first play-in game. So you kind of have to expect them to win that game. my first reaction was, well, they're going to draw Houston if they're the 7 seed in the playoffs. And I think everybody kind of, the consensus is that Houston's probably a little bit more fraudulent than some of these other teams. Maybe just the lack of the superstar on that team, right? And then they kind of came from out of nowhere for a lot of people this year. So they kind of remind me of the Mike Budenholzer Atlanta Hawks. I can't remember which year exactly that was. It may have been like 2014, somewhere in there, before he went to the Bucks. But that team got the 1 seed in the East. I think like they had like Kyle Korver and some guys on that team. It was just kind of just a bunch of glue guys together. So they kind of remind me of that. So I think everybody kind of wants to play them. So I went to go look at their odds, and the Warriors are like plus 700. They were only plus 600 on some books when those odds opened up to win the West, which is hilarious since they're not even in the playoffs. So that kind of just shows you where a lot of the money is and the liability is for the books. It's on the Lakers and the Warriors with the shortest odds outside of the Thunder, who are clearly the best team. So you would expect the Thunder to have those odds. But, to me, it's like, I don't believe in the Rockets. And I think they'll probably be an underdog if they did play the Warriors in the second round. But again, some of that is going to be the money and where the money is coming from. In the first round if the Warriors win their play-in game. But the Rockets sitting there at plus 2,500 as the 2 seed is pretty wild. Because I do think they're a very talented team. They don't have that superstar, but nothing's for certain in the playoffs this year, I think, in the NBA. So that number definitely stuck out to me. So the West is just going to be really interesting. A lot of really good teams out there.
Yeah. Let's I'll just run through some of those numbers quickly. So OKC, the hands down favorite in the West to win it all, and on Pinnacle right now 1.72. So clearly a massive favorite there. The Lakers 5.9. So they're second in terms of odds, and then the Warriors paying 8.5 to 1 to win the West. And yeah, as you mentioned, the Rockets way down the list, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th at 26 to 1 or plus 2,500. It's just wild, given that they're the second seed.
Yeah, I mean, it's like kind of difficult to go back and recall teams. I mean, I think the Grizzlies probably had similar type numbers when they were the 2 seed a couple years ago. So I can't remember what those numbers were. They made probably not this long of a shot because I do think they had the Ja Morant factor. They have a superstar that team like better public bettors and also sharp bettors can kind of get behind that sort of thing. Whereas this Rockets team really doesn't have very many household names, or if they are a household name, they're for the wrong reason, like Dylan Brooks, people like that. So. Yeah, I mean, it's just some really interesting odds. I think we talked about a month ago on the podcast about the Nuggets at plus, I think like plus 700, plus 750, and man, that ship has really gone the other way with a lot of injuries to key guys. I think Gordon was out for like weeks after that. Murray just can't get healthy, and then they fire their coach and their GM.
Which is crazy to think in the middle of a playoff run.
It's wild. And so, I've definitely got some tickets on them. And you have to kind of have a little bit of faith that the best player in the world can find a way to make a run. But at the same time, I sit and look at the first round odds and I see the Clippers at plus money against Denver. And I mean, the Clippers have been by far the better team over the last month or so. The Nuggets have played 500 basketball, and the Clippers, I think, have won 9 out of 10 to just beat the Warriors in Golden State. Ty Lue, you have to give the coaching matchup there. And if Kawhi Leonard is healthy-ish, at least, I mean, that's a really good team. So the Clippers there at plus money, I found very interesting, and I think I'll definitely be taking a little bit of that.
I like it. And, I want to mention, mentioned Dylan Brooks, a Canadian guy. He can be a real difference maker for a team like Houston, though, despite the fact that everybody hates him. He's built up that villain persona, that I've actually kind of come to like a little bit. It's kind of fun to watch, but he can make a difference on a court just with that energy. And he plays alongside somebody that actually has one of those things on his finger, and he's might be over my right shoulder right now. Fred VanVleet. You say what you want about the guy, but he's won a championship. He's been there and done that. So he might not be one of the league's superstars, but he can get things done.
Yeah, I mean they've got guys. They've got a lot of really good players, and then a lot of guys that play really hard, and they play great defense, and they definitely are annoying. And that annoying is really powerful when you have to play the same annoying person maybe 7 times in a 2-week period. And they've definitely got a lot of that. So, like I said, I think if the Warriors win, the Warriors might actually be favored in that series, and it's going to be hard not to want to take some Rockets at +1 either.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. And you mentioned Kawhi Leonard, another guy that's on that same poster over my shoulder there that won it. So, when we talk about the Clippers going and playing a team like the Nuggets, and yes, the Nuggets have also, have that star talent. I mean, they probably have the best player in the league, or at least arguably the current best player in the league, even if he's not going to win the MVP. And we know that it's going to go to Shea. Hopefully, fingers crossed. I'm rooting for Shea over here. I'm on that side of things, but getting rid of your coach as you're going into the playoffs. You mentioned Ty Lue there. I mean, that is a huge advantage when it comes to an actual playoff series.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The coaching is incredibly important in basketball. And I mean, and Ty Lue's the kind of, he's the kind of coach, he's a great coach. And he also surrounds himself with great coaches, so he's got they have Jeff Van Gundy on the bench, I love when coaches are not afraid to have other accomplished guys be on their staff, and not feel like they could get undermined or anything like that. So I think there's just depth at the coaching position, if you will, for the Clippers. And that's kind of been a hallmark as well of the Kerr regime in Golden State. So I definitely like the Clippers, that plus money there, or even getting +1.5 games. If it were to go to 7 and they lose in 7 in Denver or something like that, I think there's a lot of value on that.
Love that. Okay, so anything else on the West before we move over to the East?
Not really. I mean, it's hard to make a case against anybody, or it's hard to make a case against the Thunder, except that they're young. I think I mentioned this on one of our streams not that long ago, but I said if the Thunder weren't so young and hadn't been there before with the kind of season that they've had, they would be -500 to win the West. They would be so, because the season they've had from a net rating standpoint and just how dominant they've been is historically great. It's one of the greatest seasons of all time. And they don't really, I can't say that they're not getting credit for it, because I think they are getting credit. They're just not getting a respect in terms of the odds that other franchises and other teams would have had with the pedigree, right? If this were the Lakers, even if they had all the same players and they didn't have they had SGA as their superstar, but they were still unproven, but it was the brand of the Lakers, they would easily be -300, -400 to win the West, I think.
Okay. Well, actually, you bring up something there that I think maybe we kind of overlooked, and I don't want to go past it before we go to the East. But so OKC, the most dominant season, but Golden State isn't the same team that they were when they started the season. The Lakers aren't the same team that they were when they started the season. And, the Nuggets perhaps going in the opposite direction, but a team that, has that caliber of players on it, right? We're talking about guys like LeBron James and Doncic on the Lakers. Now we've got Curry playing with Jimmy Butler on the Warriors. And of course, Jokic can never be overlooked. So I just wonder, are we maybe not giving those? I'm thinking about the Lakers and the Warriors specifically. Are we not giving them enough credit in this whole conversation and how they've changed?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the odds makers certainly kind of are. The Warriors being 8-1, having and not even being in the playoffs to win the West is certainly evidence that they are getting that. I think that the Lakers' odds were actually shorter and before they went on kind of a bad run, which the run the Lakers are on right now is a little more indicative of the team that they are, rather than the 2-week stretch after that Luka trade, where it's kind of like an injection of life into that team where everybody's playing a lot better, harder, better defense. And I think they have a lot of defensive shortcomings on that team that were somehow not showing themselves. And I think they've kind of come back down to earth in that facet. So I think there's respect being shown specifically to the Lakers and the Warriors in the betting market, maybe just because of the brands that they are. I do think 12-1 for Denver or 16-1 for the Clippers is probably not enough respect for those teams and the Rockets, obviously, as we discussed. But I do think that I'm not going to bet the minus odds on the Thunder because again, I'm not following my own advice or my own prescription here, I guess. But the unproven aspect of it is something that will steer you away. But I'm just saying from a historical standpoint of how great that team is in the regular season, the odds are not as reflective of that as I think they would be if they had a different logo.
Yeah, and I hear you there. Like, who wants to bet a team now at minus odds to win on one side, right? You want something that's gonna really sort of pay and has some significant value behind it. Okay, so just to recap the West before we go to the East, you like the Clippers in the series against the Nuggets. You think that if it ends up being Golden State facing the Rockets, that perhaps there could be some value on the Rockets. Those are sort of your two early round looks.
Yeah. I mean, and I think from the Rockets standpoint, I wouldn't even take them in that series. I would just rather bet the 25-1. Which the number will actually get better if the Warriors win, because right now the price is baked in that there's some chance Memphis wins that game, right? And so I think the odds will actually get better if you just wait. And so you might get a plus 2,800, plus 3,000 maybe if the Warriors win, which I think will be crazy to have given that they would get to play either the Lakers or the Wolves in the next round, and I think they actually match up pretty well with those teams. So.
Cool. Yeah, no, I like it. And a really feisty Rockets team. It's been fun to sort of watch them. Okay, let's go over to the East. I know we had a futures on the Milwaukee Bucks. That was laid several weeks ago now, a couple of months ago.
Yeah, a couple of months. Yeah,
it was a long time ago. But talk to me about where you're starting at from when it comes to this East conference. It's perhaps been I guess maybe more predictable than the West.
Yeah. And I think the East has been predictable. Somehow it feels like my entire lifetime. Yeah. It's just whatever team LeBron was on, and then there would maybe be one or two other teams that were contenders, if you will. But it wasn't, it is partly, speaks to how dominant LeBron has been in his career, but also just simply how weak the Eastern Conference was in terms of the number of stars that they had and all of that could actually carry teams. So, obviously we took a Bucks bet. The Bucks are you can get astronomical odds on the Bucks now. I don't think I'd advise at that time, Lillard was healthy. It was a totally different bet. I don't even know if Lillard, I haven't followed the latest news. I think there was hope he would be back for the playoffs. I don't know that he's going to be back for round one. I don't think that he is, at least last that I looked. But yeah, it just feels like Cleveland has been vulnerable the last month or so. They've really kind of looked like not that ultra dominant team that they showed early on in the season. And Boston is obviously just looming and is kind of I think everybody would be surprised if Boston didn't get to the finals, right? And indicative of that is their odds are about the same to win the East as the Thunder are to win the West. But again, the Celtics season isn't as historically great. So again, that kind of gives credence to what I was saying about the Thunder. But it's the odds kind of dictate that it's either the Cavs or the Celtics, and anybody else would just be a really, really big surprise. So it's kind of hard to justify finding value. I will say I think the Pacers at 25-1, 28-1, I think you can actually get out there, is an interesting one to me because they play the Bucks. They host the Bucks at home, so they've got the home court advantage. They get to play two familiar opponents, so both the Bucks and then the Cavs, if they played them in the next round, would be division opponents. So they played them 4 times this season. I can't remember their record exactly, but I do know that they played them well. I think they match up well against those teams. And they've kind of really been playing their best basketball over the last month and a half, as opposed to the Cavs who've been kind of going the other way. And then obviously the Bucks are injury riddled and all of those uncertainties with them. So the Pacers to me is a really good value bet at that 28-1, especially if you just don't really believe in what Cleveland's doing this year and you think there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors with them.
Okay, so the Pacers to win the East, you're sort of starting to lean that way, or at least think there's some value there.
I definitely think there's value at like 25-1, because I just think everybody would have to agree you would rather play Cleveland in round 2 than Boston in round 2, right? Now, you may want to argue that Boston, I think there's some issues with Jaylen Brown's health. So I've heard that like he basically needed to play all the games left in the season within the last like week or two to make all NBA. And I don't think he did that, but they were trying to have him do that. And he was having some knee issues and he was just trying to play through it just to meet that 65 game criteria for the all NBA team to get money on his contract, which is a terrible kind of incentive that the league now has for people to play. Though I understand why they want that 65 game thing. You know, the players kind of did it to themselves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with load management and everything else, we want, people want to see players playing. And that was a big storyline throughout the season about, who was playing, who wasn't, why, who cared, who didn't, all of that. So,
yeah. So I'm not sure that he's healthy, which is kind of a big deal for Boston. But I think whoever they draw in that first round, maybe he can even sit a couple games. And I don't think they should really have an issue with, whether it's Orlando or Atlanta. I don't think that that's really a problem. I think maybe you'd argue that you'd rather get Boston early when they're not totally healthy. But I'd say, I don't know, like, how do I know Porzingis is going to be healthy 3 weeks from now? I'd almost rather roll the dice and let's get like Porzingis to play 12 more games and get some miles built up on those guys who have been kind of resting and being load managed all year. They're an aging team with some injury prone guys. So I think catching them later isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I think the Pacers have actually a really good path in the Eastern Conference for the 25-1.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Like, the further that Celtics team goes into the playoffs, the more wear and tear on some of these guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back-to-back 100-game seasons for these guys who have, whether it's Porzingis or most recently Brown, but I mean, Horford is way up there. Guys that have had some injury history.
Yeah.
It's a lot of games. It's a lot of basketball. It's a lot of miles. It's a lot of minutes. So
and their style in particular, it can get very physical and can be, very defensive oriented. And so, you got to wonder, is that also going to lend itself to, a little more tread?
Yeah. Yeah. And as far as the rest of the East goes, I just, maybe we'll get some good games, some good series, but I think it's just, like I said at the top, we'll be surprised if it's not Boston, and even more surprised if it's not Boston or Cleveland that comes out. So, there's some of those, it's not as interesting as the West where, like even Memphis, I don't think they're very good, but like they could make some noise. The Warriors, you expect to make some noise from the play-in. And then the Wolves, obviously, all those teams could do something, but it's like, do we really think the Pistons in the 6th seed are going to shock anybody here? Do we really think that like the Heat are going to come out of the 10 spot in the play-in and knock up the I don't think anybody thinks any of that. So probably going to be some uninteresting series out there in the East, I would think.
Okay, so the only thing from the East right now that you think might have some value is the Pacers to win it all.
Yes, I will. I think I also kind of like maybe a little bit of a stab on the Pistons in the first round. I probably like the plus number of games, like the spread on the games. I was trying to pull that up. I was talking because I think the Pistons can make that series frustrating for the Knicks.
Okay.
And I think they can get under their skin a little bit, and I think they match up kind of well with them. They've got a lot of size, which the Knicks have a lot of size. So I was just looking for like some odds on the plus number of games in the series. So maybe if you could get like a plus 2.5 games or a plus 1.5 games, I think that's value, because I'm looking, they're like 4-1 to win that series, which, I don't mind a little bit of a crack on that, because I think they could beat the Knicks, I think they beat the Knicks probably more often than that implies. but it's not something I would make like a heavy bet on because it's, and I wouldn't expect them to do much damage after that because then they'd play Boston or, in the next round. So that's probably where I would stop backing the Pistons is that first round. So I'm looking at the series spread right now for the Pistons. Yeah, you can get the Pistons plus 2.5 games minus 135 at the time we're recording this on DraftKings. So that means, Pistons to lose in 6 or less.
Right.
Or lose in 6 or more. Sorry. Just to win 2 games. I think that's pretty good. I think they could definitely win 2 games in that series. Especially you're kind of implying they're going to get 3 home games in that. So, yeah.
Huh. Okay. I like it. All right. So Pistons plus on the series plus 2.5. A potential small stab at Pacers to win the East. On the West, again, we've got possible look at the Rockets for a small bet at 28-1 or something crazy like that, and the Clippers to beat the Nuggets, and maybe a spread bet on that series. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if you can get close to normal juice on the plus 1.5 games for the Clippers, I would like that. And that's probably gonna be pretty tough. Minus 180 on that. Okay. So that's a little tough. You could probably sweeten that a little bit with I do parlay a good amount in the NBA playoffs because the NBA is not like the NFL. It's not like the NHL, right? Like these teams that are really superior in these 7-game series it's just very difficult for big upsets to happen. So you parlay it with Boston to win their series, Cleveland to win their series, and Oklahoma City to win their series. And then you just you get the odds down a little bit. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's, sounds really square and dumb, but it's just those teams tend to not lose in the NBA playoffs. It's very rare that the one loses to the 8, right?
Yeah. So. No, the gap, the disparity gap is a little bit bigger in the NBA than it is in some of those. Some of those
less variance in the playoffs, just number of possessions and the number of games you have to play. So
yeah, exactly. All right, John. Well, great stuff, man. Really appreciate you coming on. Are we going to do something for the second round of the NBA playoffs? Can we expect you back then to maybe have a look at what came through, what didn't, and then have it give us another outlook?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it just only gets more interesting as things get on because then you start talking about series where you think every team actually has a chance to win, unlike some of these first round series. And hopefully the Jets have taken care of business in their first round as well on the NHL side.
All right, perfect. Yeah, exactly. We're going to have the NHL playoffs coming at us pretty soon too. So maybe we'll even have you back next week to break down the first round of the NHL playoffs. What do you think? Yeah.
I'll have to do some more homework. But yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, that's what we're doing here. We're putting John to work, giving him some homework to take care of. And I guess we'll see you back next week then, buddy.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right. Well, to you and to all of the sports bettors out there tuning in from around the world, till next week, keep beating those books. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Lines. Remember to like, download, and subscribe. We are on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Have a betting story or want to be featured on our podcast? Drop a note in the comments below. And if you want to join in Play Live, use promo code Behind the Lines.